Our guest today is a bit of an industry legend in this country. He's journeyed from making his first coffees in a steakhouse, of all places, to competing in and judging some of the biggest coffee competitions in the world. Today, he heads up the coffee division at Soul Origin. With more than 150 locations Australia-wide, they aspire to big things, with our guest leading the charge. Today, we are very excited to welcome Sam Taylor, Head of Coffee at Soul Origin, to the Coffee Lab. G'day, Sam.
G'day.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's lovely that you find yourself in Melbourne in
Absolutely.
about 1,000 degrees today, so I apologise for the heat. But
all good. Great to be here.
We've been chasing Sam for a while, haven't we?
We've been threatening to do this for, how long's it been? It's been a while.
About a year and a half.
Yeah, it's been a while. So I really appreciate you making the effort to come and do this.
Happy to be here.
I've just quickly, I'm a little, you're probably going to ask this anyway. Coffee in a steakhouse, what's that?
So I was telling Tom, one of my first sort of big boy jobs, I suppose, was I was assistant manager at a family-run steakhouse business called Black Stump. They had about 30 venues across Sydney.
Yep.
They cast your mind back to Andronicus Coffee.
Oh yeah.
On a two group. And
San Marino Lisa or something.
Yeah, something like that. And
yep.
Such was my, excitement about this, foaming some milk and using a spoon and making grandma chinos and sort of putting some chocolate sauce on the top, that I used to get called out of the kitchen when I was on the grill shifts just to make coffees for people in the steakhouse. So it was kind of, it was a sort of entry point into coffee, something that sort of ignited the fire, I guess.
Do you remember the first one? Do you remember your first time?
I don't really remember the first time. I remember the first time I came at drinking coffee.
Yeah.
That was in my in-laws' kitchen. I think it was a Moccona vanilla flavoured instant coffee.
Fantastic.
I was about 17. Had never really drunk much coffee before that. And then, as was the fashion at the stage, it turned into, I used to drink a lot of the sweet things at Glory Jeans.
Yeah.
So, nowadays I look at the younger generation and think, well, if I were that age, what would I want to drink?
You call yourself an accidental coffee lover. What does that mean?
So my introduction to coffee when I was a kid was my dad used to make this awful, over-extracted, sit in the plunger for 2 hours kind of black goop that I wasn't particularly fond of. It smelt pretty acrid. I'd tried it once or twice, didn't really take to it. So my impression of coffee as a young person was it's got to be bitter and dark and, all of the sort of stereotypical things. And then, like I say, I mean, I had a passion for hospitality. I had a passion for working in restaurants. I cut my teeth in McDonald's also. I used to drink the percolated coffee in McDonald's with milk and sugar when I was on the breakfast shifts. And then that sort of evolved into getting opportunities in cafes and coming across some really great industry people over the years. And I've always had an inquisitive mind. So understanding the why and the how has sort of, led me down a path of 20-something years of, wanting to make coffee better and better.
And you've worked in like a variety of coffee environments, if you like. You've done the small cafe thing, you've done the startup thing, you've done the very big business thing now. What are some of those kind of, defining moments in your journey that have given you that perspective on the industry?
So, I think I've been fortunate enough to work in a couple of different venues that were probably ahead of their time for their locale, and that presents its own challenges. I grew up sort of on the outskirts of Sydney, never worked locally until after I got married, and then I worked in a small cafe there that was probably would have been more attuned to the Surrey Hills environment. So it was quite a culture shock for customers there, but we were quality forward. We worked with Dane's Coffee, and we wanted to give customers a great experience. And then all the way through to I worked at Glory Jeans for a while in the mid 2000s at what I thought at the time was a bit of a trying to understand mass business, trying to understand big business coffee culture. but more attuned to understanding the consumer. And I think that over time that's probably set me up in different venues I've been in to clue into what people want. And the industry goes through ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's more about what we want to show customers. But at the end of the day, when you're trying to stay in business, it comes down to the customer and giving them what they want. That's what gets people through the door.
True.
And what is that like? Is there a tension between, in the coffee world, between how we think people should be consuming these products versus how they prefer to?
Look, absolutely. I mean, I think at the coffee competition end of the spectrum, it's all about showcasing the best of what that coffee can give you, whether it's jasmine highlights or, I've got a Panama Geisha from Cup of Excellence or something. And me, honestly, I love those coffees. Those coffees that give you an experiential moment or blow your mind with what the flavour that they're able to deliver. Over the years I remember tasting a coffee at a cupping once that tasted like pavlova with tropical fruits. I've had a filter coffee that tasted like I'd put a bunch of Skittles in my mouth. I've had a coffee that tasted like I'd necked a bunch of fruit tingles, which if you're outside of Australia, you probably won't understand. So coffee can be so many different things. And for those that are tuned into that wavelength, it's super exciting. But I mean, if I cast my mind back 15, 17 years to my time at Gloria Jeans, it was trying to understand, well, what does the everyday coffee drinker want from that experience? And that is a push-pull in business, because a lot of people want to drink a flat white in this country. A lot of people want to drink a cappuccino. I mean, in the business I work in today, cappuccino is still far and away one of the most popular things we sell. So, we've got to make sure we get that right before we can share the high notes of single origin with people.
I think it must be challenging being consumer-centric like that. And, we spoke about this earlier, how important it is to be consumer-centric while trying to push innovation as well to differentiate yourself against what else is in the market. Because you obviously want to, like you said, do the core things well that people want, but you also want to go, what can we do to get them to try different, whether they're different coffees or different brew methods or things like that. Is there an approach to how that is done? Or
I think there's a big piece around, like, a lot of people talk about customer education, and I think that starts and ends with coffee professionals, but also baristas and how they comprehend product. I think some of the best baristas or the most well-rounded baristas I suppose I've come across, across the last 20 years, are people who display an inquisitiveness and I suppose an excitement that they then want to share with their customers. So, behind any coffee machine, there's always customers who want to know, where does your coffee come from? What beans are in this blend? And if you don't have those answers, well, then insecurity will take over. So preparedness and knowing what you know, without that level of arrogance that can be perceived from professionalism sometimes, I think it's important to make sure that you just try to give people that information in a humble way.
And how do you, you've talked about sort of meeting the customer where they are. Why do you feel that that's so important? And I guess, what is the role of the concept of hospitality in that as well?
So when I talk about the steakhouse experience, that was one of the first, I suppose, really serious hospitality jobs I ever had. And on my very first day, I started about 3 days before a Mother's Day. And one of the pieces of training that I always take away from that was, I was told, if there's a problem with the customer, sort the problem out first, and we'll figure out what went wrong later on. And sometimes I look at, the hospitality space in Australia in general, and I think at times we've drifted a little bit away from being that customer-centric. Sometimes people want to push back on the customer. Well, no, you didn't order it that way or whatever. I've always had that mantra that, you should look after the customer, and even if you feel that you didn't make the mistake, the onus is on you. They're paying you for a service. The onus is on you to look after them and provide them with said service. Because you don't know what else is going on in their day. You don't know whether they've, come from a situation where they've been told that, they've got an illness, or they've lost a loved one, or maybe they just got fired. They're seeking out, in this case, coffee, and coffee means something different to everyone. Coffee is a part of people's day, whether it's a Kickstarter, whether it's a mid-morning rush, whether it's an afternoon thing. It means something to people. It's a moment in time. It's an experiential thing. That first sip, that moment that really can translate something for people is important. So our duty as baristas, as coffee professionals, is to respect the product we're working with and deliver that in the best way we can, consistently, to give our customer a best experience. Give them value for $4, $5, $10, whatever they're paying us. So it doesn't matter if you're making a flat white with caramel syrup or a Panama Geisha pour over, the same rules apply.
Can you think of a customer interaction that you had at any point that caused you to kind of rethink your approach to that moment, that interaction? Yeah,
absolutely. I remember maybe 10 years ago or so, I was involved in a startup business. At the time, we were a bit disruptive in the environment we were in. We were, taking the world on through specialty coffee and, sort of that, Surrey Hills-esque kind of feel. And look, we made waves. We were doing a great job. But I suppose at some point we developed a little bit of a mindset of, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and this is how we want to showcase things. And that mentality does work, and certainly in a specialised concept, it does really work. But I think probably what we overlooked was a little bit of, we probably had some barista-imposed rules, and I was as guilty as anybody for that, around, you can't have this with this, or, we won't substitute this. And I remember one occasion where we had some feature pour-overs going, and I was super passionate about pour-overs, and a lady said to me, "Can I have a pour-over, and I want some skinny milk to put in it?" And I sort of tried to be polite, and I said, "Look, we don't really do that because it's really not going to taste very good." And her response was, "Well, that's what I want." I sort of said, "Well, okay, I'm okay to give it to you, but I just want to let you know, I really don't think it's going to taste very good." Now, what I probably should have said was, if you find that you don't experience it, happy to give you something different. I didn't. I probably got a bit indignant. I gave it to her, and my memory is seeing the cup outside. She'd probably taken one sip, but before she'd left, she had said, "I don't understand what it is about you people who want to tell me how I can drink my coffee." And I think there are moments in time across your career that stick with you, and you reflect back on as benchmark moments. So what that's always said to me is, you know what, that's the reality, that customer doesn't want to be told how they need to appropriate themselves to come inside your venue, because all that leads to is a sense of alienation and that they're not accepted, and really we should be the other way around. We should be trying to make sure that every customer, no matter where they come from, what they like to drink, that they feel accepted. I'll give you another example is, the macchiato or the magic or the long mac. Australians drink coffee in very different ways, and through my current role, one of the things I've learned is you have to be really in tune and aware of what people are doing and how they want to drink things. My philosophy is if somebody comes and asks me for a macchiato, that's an invitation to ask them about their coffee, ask them how they like to drink their coffee. And the reason why is because a macchiato in Melbourne typically is slightly different to how macchiatos are made in Sydney, and it's extremely different to how macchiatos are made in Perth. So if you don't know that, then, or even a magic, if you're standing behind a coffee machine and someone from Melbourne who's used to drinking a magic, who's in a hurry, going to a meeting in Sydney, and they say, hey mate, can I have a magic? And even if I don't know, I have to, as a professional, humble myself to say, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm really not familiar with that concept. Can you just explain it to me? And I've always found if you feel confident enough to just do that, well, not only does it, break down that person's defenses so they're not upset, but it also means they recognise you're going to that length to give them what they want.
And is that a method for almost breaking the tension between what the customer wants and what you think the customer should have? Like, is it an opportunity even to educate as well in that moment?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because say I was a barista in Perth, and in Perth, a long Mac and a magic, they're not that different depending on your brew ratio. They're not all that different. The ignorant person would go to Perth and say, well, a long Mac topped up is a double latte. But that's not the terminology that they use. So learn the language, and it's okay. It doesn't matter if you think it's something different. That's what they want. That's how they like to talk about it. That's the coffee of their state. So knowing these things and educating yourself, it is a way of breaking down the tension. If you use that to say, oh, that's so funny because it's really similar to what we would call a double latte. Isn't that an interesting, cultural point of difference? Or, same with the magic. At the end of the day, the customer wants what they want. Give them what they want.
Yeah, absolutely.
What happens if you ask for a magic in Rome?
Never tried.
I don't know.
Never tried.
We should all go and ask.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Let's do that. Next podcast, we'll record in Rome.
We should do.
Yeah, deal.
We should do.
You're on.
I was wondering, how did you become involved with Soul Origin though? Because you've been in various organisations, obviously, and it sounds as though you really had those pivotal moments and experiences along the way, I suppose, to get context about what consumers want. But how did you arrive into the company before you got into the role that you're in today?
Interesting question. So I've been there about 8.5 years, and I suppose probably about 9 years ago, I was working in a cafe. I'd had an opportunity to do some TAFE training. I was involved in piloting a course at the Sydney Coffee Academy at Ride TAFE, aimed at upskilling baristas out there in the network, so they could come in and they could learn about brew ratios and really sort of taking their skills to the next level from a sort of a fundamental level. So I'd been doing that for a while, and I'd really enjoyed the ability to share things I'd learned over time with other baristas. And I had explored the opportunity of looking around at different jobs and that might involve training and things like that over the last little while. I was also tossing up the idea of opening my own venue. But as I was telling Tom, at times I'm a little bit, probably risk averse, and felt that was, maybe a little bit of a sort of intimidating project. So actually, through another friend in the industry who's overseas these days, Paul Helmers, I reached out to him, and he knew loads of people around the industry. I thought maybe he knows about someone who's looking for training opportunities that I haven't heard of or aren't being advertised. And he put me in touch with the founder and our then general manager at Soul Origin. They invited me in for a chat. It was a role that didn't currently exist in the business. They had about 40 venues at the time, predominantly in Sydney. They had big plans. But what really drew me in was, I suppose, the founder's commitment that they felt that there was a gap in the market when they started the business of consistently good specialty coffee in supermarkets, for coffee appreciators, be it, parents, young people, older people, and they wanted to meet the Australian market where they felt there was a gap and really take great coffee all across the country. And I remember going home from that that lunch meeting with no promise of anything, just a promise to follow up the conversation, no offer, no anything. And, having a conversation with my wife, and she took one look at my face and said, you want to go be part of that journey, don't you? So
you're all in, mate.
Yeah. So, and that was really the scope of opportunity from going from, perhaps impacting on, 1,000 customers a week, to having an impact on a couple of hundred baristas who service, tens of thousands of customers across the country. And obviously now we sit at 160 odd venues across all states of Australia and into New Zealand. And that's a pretty special thing to have been a part of.
Absolutely. Were the coffee menus or systems very different when you started to what they are now? Or have you found that the system was there and it's just scaled as the organisation's grown? Or
I think, the systems were there. Probably what I've been able to do is, influence, I suppose, polishing certain things. So at the time, we didn't have any puck presses. We were using O-house scales to weigh coffee. We've evolved and moved into dosing cups and other sorts of systems, but the foundations and the passion for great specialty coffee has always been there. That's a part of the founding cornerstone. So, I see it as a privilege to be a part of piloting that forward. And, as a big business now, we need to continue to challenge ourselves to innovate. We've invested more time and energy into looking at how the younger generation want to approach coffee. It's widely publicised about how, cold beverage delivery of coffee has really exploded in the last sort of 5 years or so. We're no different in that space. We're continuing to look at how can we meet the market there and explore that space.
When you said when you entered the businesses, it was about 40 stores. Now it's in excess of 150 stores, and into New Zealand now as well. Mm-hmm. What's kind of the trajectory been across that period of time? And I guess what are some of the significant achievements or milestones that you've managed to achieve?
Yeah. So look, the first couple of years I was in the business, we were in a really heavy acceleration mode. I think we opened 50 stores plus in the first 2 years I was in the business. We expanded into Melbourne, we expanded into South Australia, we grew into Western Australia and the Northern Territory. So, the business was already well established at that point, and then we'd been around sort of 6 or 7 years at that stage, and we were in a heavy growth stage. Obviously, then COVID slowed things down a little bit, but we did continue to grow the footprint. And then probably over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a fair bit of expansion again. So it's exciting. We've had the opportunity to take our coffee and our beverage portfolio, but also take the broader offering of the business to people in all corners of Australia. And it's pretty exciting sometimes when you see, Facebook comments or something about, hey, when are you coming to this area or that area or the other thing? Or I get family and friends asking me that kind of thing a lot. So,
and me going, when are you coming so we can record the podcast? Constantly, probably.
Yeah. Every time I see Dave Burkett on my phone, make a podcast call.
It's a franchise model, right?
Yeah.
So explain that. How does that work?
Dave and Tom, apply to buy a franchise at Sole Origin.
Can you establish one? Like you can establish a new one, or is that?
Yeah, if there's opportunity. So we have a large team that look after franchising and leasing. So finding the right kinds of opportunities, securing the leases, and then selling those opportunities on to prospective franchise partners. Once that relationship is established, then there's a pretty stringent training program of which myself and my team are a big part of. And then, I suppose on a day-to-day basis, myself and the broader retail team, as we call ourselves, are there as a real support function. So in any franchise business, it's a partnership, right? It's all about working together to get the best for everyone involved.
Is there a typical day for you in your role now? Because I know you travel a lot. You sit across multiple things, like being the head of coffee is obviously training is part of it, and like coffee excellence, but it would encompass a lot of things. Is there a typical day, or it's?
There aren't too many days that are exactly the same.
So no.
But I kind of like it. I kind of like it that way.
Yeah.
Some days the phone doesn't ring that much. Other days, I think my record was 150 phone calls in one day, maybe.
Outbound or inbound?
Both.
Yeah.
But it's an exciting journey, and the variety is kind of what keeps you going. I'm just impassioned about all of our franchise partners and their teams, and all of the great baristas we have in our network and their development, whether it's from point A to point B, if they're new to our brand, and understanding our systems. If they've got prior experience, one of the things that we always work towards is respecting people's previous experience, but sort of trying to guide them towards the best outcomes using our coffee and equipment. All the way through to, each and every year we run a nationwide barista competition, which involves a couple of hundred people getting involved.
Or for internal baristas?
Internal baristas. Yeah. And that provides us with, some of the absolute highlights of the year. So,
yeah. And surely maintaining consistency across that many shop fronts must be a real challenge. What role have you played in doing that? What does that look like for you guys?
That's absolutely a challenge. I mean, it's challenging enough as a singular barista to be consistent in one venue every day. So, when Dave asked about innovation, part of my job now is looking at how can we support the franchises by systemizing, simplifying, and just making everything easier to maintain that level of consistency, whether it's the 5-day-a-week barista who's doing that, or it's the person who works one shift a week for 3 hours. How can we translate those messages so that the systems are simple, so that ultimately that the customer gets the best of us all the time? Because we're only as good as our next cup of coffee, the franchise partners will tell you that I'm very passionately driven by these things. But it's our mission to try and make sure that we take great coffee to everyone.
Yeah, I remember when early on when we first met each other, one thing that stuck with me that you said, and this will be a segue into talking to you about your judging and World Coffee events and everything.
You're not supposed to announce the segues, Dave.
No.
Just let them happen.
Sorry, yeah. I should know that by now, Tom, shouldn't I? But I remember we were at one of your national comps in St Martin's Place in Sydney. So it was outside in the middle of Sydney. It was very cool. And I was like, wow, this is because a lot of multi-site and franchise groups do national training comps, but not like that. And that's something that's unique, I think, about Soul Origin, from my own personal point of view of what I've seen. And I remember saying to you, wow, man, this is full on. This is amazing. And you said to me, I said, what are you trying to do with this? And you said, I want to sort of remove that stigma around coffee quality for multi-site and franchise groups. And I would like to have someone in our network compete and win in a competition. Is that still a goal for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's still a goal. The closest we've got so far is our franchise partner who runs our Melbourne airport venue just recently competed in the Melbourne retail internal barista competition, and he won. which was a highly contested competition judged by Justin Metcalf and amongst others. And that's probably the closest we've come to that. One of the trainers that works with me is the current Australian espresso champion, and he'll be going to represent Australia at the World Championships in Italy later in the year. It's absolutely an aspiration for us to continue to push forward into that marketplace, and our internal competition serves as providing us with that purpose. Ultimately, it's a goal that would be great to achieve. However, if the internal competition does its job and it means that Australian consumers get a better coffee all the time, then, that's probably the bigger win.
Yeah.
So tell us about your involvement in competitions as well, because you've both competed and judged, right, at quite a high level. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I kind of caught the bug in about 2012 for latte art competing. I was sort of in my maybe late 20s or so, but maybe I was a bit late to the competition scene in that regard. Jumped in, found that I did all right at some latte art things. I got encouragement from colleagues and other people to try my hand at ASCA competitions, and look, had some moderate success in that space for a couple of years. Probably never put my best foot forward because of preparation and things like that, but just found that was a space that I really enjoyed and wanted to be a part of. And I found myself also looking at the potential in other competitors and wanting to try and find ways to encourage them or befriend them and things like that. So I sort of stopped competing in about 2017, and then sort of moved into a judging space, tried my hand at that side of things with the initial intention of trying to understand how to be a better competitor. And then
a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, I wanted to understand what were the things that judges were talking about or looking at when they were assessing somebody like me on stage. And I hoped, I suppose, at the time that it would make me less nervous and a more rounded performer when I competed. But then I found that it was great to actually be a part of that side of things and give people an objective explanation on what I'd seen or what I'd tasted. And I got some great feedback around how that was going and how I went with that. I got opportunity to judge in the National Latte Art Finals a couple of times. I headed that up once or twice with the support of a few close friends in that space. And that led me to discovering in 2022 that I had fulfilled the requirements to go and sit examination and qualification to do World Latte Art Championship judging. So I went and sat this was just before the World Barista Championships in Melbourne in 2022. Sol Origin supported me in going to go and sit those tests because that's great recognition for skill base you've built up. And went and sat those tests, and through that process actually got the opportunity to sit the written exam for World Barista Championships as well. Managed to qualify in both of those fields and was invited to go and judge at Melbourne WBC 2022.
It sounds like a really intense process.
Yeah, it's it's 2 days of written tests, tasting tests, judging tests where people are, don't have a podcast camera on you, but they're assessing everything you do, say, the way you pick up your spoon, that you follow the protocols, that you listen to the competitor.
So you're being judged on judging.
Judged on your judging behaviour, because when you're on the World Barista Championship stage, and you can see videos of me on YouTube, I almost stuffed up something for one of the competitors because I didn't quite hear something correctly.
Like a process thing, an instruction or something like that.
Yeah, she asked us to wait, and I went to pick something up, and she actually had to correct me at the time, but that's okay. She did it very fluidly. Kudos to her. But yeah, so that's a pretty intense process, but I find with processes like that, when you're passionate about it and you can lock in and you trust your judgment, then it sort of falls into place. So, and then, I was able to judge at WBC 2022, and that was a fantastically rewarding experience in my professional journey.
So double-barreled question. The first one is like, what are some of the lessons that you learned through that process that have really stuck with you? And secondly, how have you translated lessons from that world into, Solo Origin and the other things that you're doing?
I think that from a coffee professional experience perspective, what it does do is give you the language skills to be objective in a clear manner. So in WBC, you're not allowed to write anything that would be considered coaching. It just has to be factual. Just has to be. You said I was going to taste red apple, but I tasted green apple. You said it was going to be sweet, and I didn't find it sweet. So you have to be quite objective and factual, but also the comments that you write have to support the scores you've given. So I can't say it was, sour and dry on my tongue, but give the person a 4 out of 6, because that doesn't make sense. So what it has allowed me to do is be more honestly objective with baristas in my stores about how they are executing. And the approach I take to that, to not scare people, is to say, my job is actually here to give you feedback on what this tastes like, because the last thing we want is a customer to walk away having this experience and perhaps they don't tell you, so you don't know. At least if you've got that information, we can correct it and the customer gets the best of what we can give them.
It's like gentle candour. Do you have a favourite signature drink that you remember from the Worlds? Or it could have just been a particular milk-based coffee or...
Look, that week, I was fortunate enough to judge up to semi-finals. I tasted some real wow coffees. The most interesting of which, I think, was a competitor who gave us a green tip geisha that tasted like lemongrass.
Oh, wow.
And 20 minutes later in deliberation, I had this overwhelming aroma of lemongrass wafting through my mouth. And it was incredible. It sounds awful in a coffee, the idea of lemongrass. It's more suited to a curry than a coffee. But it was amazing. It was really enjoyable from that perspective. I'd never had a coffee and never since have I had a coffee that tasted like lemongrass. So it's those little moments that make you just go, wow. It's the first time I tasted Kopi Luwak. Same thing. I approached that coffee thinking, this came out of a Civet Cat. It's not going to taste good. But it was, creamy and sweet and delicious. And I made it in a plunger in a very rudimentary kind of way. But I obviously got something right because it tasted pretty good.
So let's talk about the future a little bit. What does the next while look like for Soul Origin? What's the plans? Can you let us in on any secrets?
Well, I think we have just gone public that we're moving into the drive-through space. It's a big project that we're working on, and that presents some interesting intricacies for my role and how we're going to manage that space. But it also presents us with another unique opportunity to share what we're passionate about and share our offering with people of Australia, perhaps in what they feel might be a more convenient way. They don't even have to get out of their car anymore.
And are you going to are you going to pilot that with like 1 or 2 outlets, or is it going to be like, let's go bang?
Look, the drive-through space, I think there's different time constraints involved in that sort of style of business, and we're just kind of new to that space. So there are plans in the work for a number of venues, but I think it'll be gathering momentum slowly at first, and then running downhill after that.
Is
like
that a
everything.
pathway? Is that a pathway to competing with the Maccas and 7-Elevens of this world? Like, is that what that is?
Oh, look, I think it's a sign of the times in some regard. You know, I think in a pressured world where people have less time, less money, you know, and need more convenience, it's a landscape thing. It doesn't mean that we'll slow down on our traditional format stores or anything like that. I think it's just about meeting customers more and more where they want to be met. You know,
See that we've gone full circle.
Being consumer centric, yes.
well, at the end of the day, it's also about sharing, trying to get your message out there and share what you're passionate about with as many people as possible. So, you know, from my standpoint, I think every Australian deserves to drink great coffee. You know, you only got to travel around the world to understand how lucky we are and how fortunate we are for the quality of coffee that we have in this country. And if, you know, myself and the team at Soul Origin, if we can play a part in that, then, you know, we want to do that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, obviously at the time of recording, there's all-time high pricing for green coffee, and I would say, for lack of a better word, some hysteria that's now going on in the industry globally.
Yep.
How are you guys navigating this as an idea, I suppose, that, you know, that coffee pricing is going to go up, which, for the record, for those that are listening that don't know, it's actually at a farm level, people are being paid probably what they should be getting paid compared to what they have been getting paid. So it's a good thing, but the consequence is all of us as consumers need to pay what that's worth, which ties into our whole earlier discussion about value and everything as well. But how are you looking to navigate that as quite a large coffee organisation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and probably something we could record a whole nother podcast about. I mean, look, I think from my perspective, there's a couple of different things there. One is ensuring that, you know, we work as best we can with our supply partners to make sure that we're continuing to deliver on our quality promise from a product perspective, which we have an unwavering commitment to bringing specialty grade coffee to people of Australia. But I think more importantly, it's also about continuing to drive the education piece around all of our baristas in making sure that our customers get the best of what we can give them all the time. So it's one thing to have great product, and, you know, it's maybe another thing to charge what the customer feels is a premium for that. But if you can back that up through consistency and quality, then really you're honouring the supply chain all the way back to the farm, to that person who is then getting paid what they're worth.
Absolutely.
You know, if the second part of the question and the look on your face is, do I think that we're going to be charging $12 a cup of coffee in the next little while? No, I don't think so. But, you know, we need to make sure wherever the market takes us in regard to, you know, to pricing, at the customer level, that we are giving them value for money through consistent product quality. And more now, I think, given this hysteria, you know, coffee 10, 15 years ago was $2.50 a cup in the venue I was working in, and people would come 3 times a day when they're in their office because they could afford to do it. I remember a time as a customer myself when you could go and I could get a coffee for myself and my wife at most places and get change out of $10. And the concept now that I might not get change out of, you know, much change out of $10 for one cup of coffee, I know myself as a consumer, I'm just looking for that to be backed up by quality. So
absolutely,
my charge as somebody who has an influence on many, many people who stand at the front line behind the coffee machine every day is to make sure that we are honouring the customer in that way. And I say honouring because if a customer chooses to spend money with you, they're making a choice that they might only be making once a day. You know, and many Australians drink great coffee at home. Lots of coffee roasters have big subscription programs that takes coffee into many houses in Australia. We're competing against people's kitchen benches now, you know. So if we want to continue to thrive, not just survive, we need to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward
For sure.
each and every day.
I think, I agree. And I think the value of what people are getting is going to come under scrutiny a lot more. So it might not be about, it's about being better to justify the extra expense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people are going to cut down how much coffee they're buying personally,
Mm-hmm.
only because I think they'll cut back on other things. And I think we might have spoken about this before. In adverse economic times in history,
Mm-hmm.
things like lipstick sales spike because people want a little treat. And a cup of coffee and the ritual of going to a cafe is that. And I have a funny feeling that people will cut back on other expenses and prioritise coffee, because the reason we have a supply and demand issue, I know there have been harvest issues, but it's because there is enormous demand for coffee. It's not wavering. So people will find a way to keep buying it, but the value is going to matter more than anything, or more than it ever has, I suppose.
Look, you're probably right. And, you know, I always think it's optimistic to look at a customer and think I could convince them to come back 2-3 times a day. I agree with you that people are probably not going to cut down on their coffee. Some customers might drink one at home and one out. I suppose when I encourage people to take the mindset that maybe that one interaction is the only coffee that person's going to be drinking that day, it's about, you know, preferential selection. If, you know, it might be through a smile, through remembering that your name's Dave, through, you know, making a joke with Tom. It's any of those little things. But at the end of the day, when the customer sips that coffee, if they're not satisfied, or if that's not a memory maker, well, you know, they might choose to drink somewhere else tomorrow. And, you know, we got to stay in business, right?
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, we are fresh out of time. I feel like we only just scratched the surface. But we will, just before we let you go, Sam, ask you a couple of key questions that we ask everyone who sits in that chair.
Sure.
First one is, if you could go back 20 odd years and give yourself some advice, what have you learned along the way that you'd offer as advice to yourself?
I think I would probably have encouraged my younger self to be more quality focused and a little bit more focused on the customer. I mean, I've been in the industry 20 odd years, and the moment I mentioned earlier about that customer really challenging my mindset was kind of halfway through that. So I think if I'd been able to take that approach a little bit earlier, maybe it would have put me in better stead.
So would you say that empathy is the most important lesson you've learned over your career?
Absolutely. I think empathy and meeting the customer halfway, I just think that's so important. You know, customers choosing to spend money with you for a product, and that should be backed up with service.
And last question, if you could start a new business tomorrow, or, you know, get involved in a new business tomorrow, what would it be?
And it could be anything.
Doesn't have to be coffee, but it could be.
Could be selling, like, I don't know, bubbles or something.
Endless market for those, if you ask my two
It could
children.
be anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. Could you create a business that just follows the Australian cricket team around the world?
I think that's already been done. I think it's called the Fanatics.
Well, I don't know. I'll create the semantics. You know?
That sounds like a good plan. Sam Taylor, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. We could have gone for hours, but really appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sam.